On February 26, 2012, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman in what would become known as one of the most prominent hate crime cases in American history. I was 11 years old when this happened, and I still remember the impact of this event on my own life. The following events would permanently change me. I remember my dad sitting me down after school to talk about what had happened to Trayvon and how it could happen to me if I wasn't careful. I learned how to talk to police, and to talk with the knowledge in mind that if anything I said was misunderstood as aggressive or rude, it could cost me my life. I learned that scaring white civilians or causing them suspicion would kill me. So I learned to dress and act in a way that made me non-threatening. Me, an 11-year-old child. I wasn't taught to socialize the same way white kids were. Black children grow up with a different kind of fear. The knowledge that in some situations one wrong word or one wrong movement could end you. And then that happened to me. I was walking home from a friend's house after going to see if he'd come out to play. He wasn't home, so I went back. As I'm walking down the sidewalk, this white woman comes out of her house and storms toward me like she's pissed, and just begins screaming at me, telling me to leave her property or she'll call the police. I'm 11 years old. I'm 4'10". I'm a child, and fresh in my child's head is the knowledge that if this woman calls the police, I could end up dead. And this woman is screaming at me, and as I'm walking away, trying not to run and trying not to cry, I'm wondering what the hell I did wrong. I went home, went in my room, and never told anyone what happened to me. The next day, I went to the school library and noticed a book by Rick Riordan that I hadn't noticed before. I was already a huge Percy Jackson fan, I still am, and it was clearly about Egyptian mythology, something I was already passionate about, and on the cover was a black boy, which caught my eye a bit because, it's difficult finding those kinds of stories that would have interested me at the time that are centered around black characters. And when I sat down to read it, I ended up reading this scene. I remember the first time he explained it to me. I was 10 and we were on our way to the airport in Athens. It was like 112 degrees outside and I was complaining that I wanted to wear shorts and a t-shirt. Why couldn't I be comfortable? We weren't going anywhere important that day, just traveling. My dad put his hand on my shoulder. Carter, you're getting older. You're an African American man. People will judge you more harshly, and so you must always look impeccable. It isn't fair, I insisted. Fairness does not mean everyone gets the same, Dad said. Fairness means everyone gets what they need, and the only way to get what you need is to make it happen yourself. Do you understand? This conversation was basically exactly what my father said to me. It's close to talks I've had with my siblings. It's close to talks I've had with my friends. These conversations about systemic racism are the closest thing to an oral tradition we have these days. A horror story passed down from generation to generation. The war story our children will tell their children, that our parents told us. It's our inheritance. I was the only black child in that school except my older sister. Yes, in 2012, years after that was assumed to be not possible in America anymore. There were no friends I could talk to about this very specific pain. No one who would really understand or respect my experience. Instances of racism toward my sister and I had gone unaddressed by the school before, and I was basically alone in this experience. Literature and entertainment in general provides escapism. I know this may seem a contradictory statement as I speak about a very specific real-life experience being represented in literature and in entertainment, but it does, and there's a special type of escapism in scenes like these. Scenes like in The Breakfast Club when characters rant about the unfairness of slut-shaming, a scene and topic we still talk about now. Scenes in Teen Titans where Cyborg and Starfire have a serious conversation about racism, and you know why he cares so much without him having to really say it. A type of escapism seeing queer identity celebrated in Steven Universe, Sense8, Euphoria, and other shows. It's the escapism of being understood, of having your experiences with the current systemic oppressions that we face being understood and validated by someone else. Gaslighting is an abuse tactic where the abuser will use different methods to try and convince their victims they aren't actually being abused. It's a tactic anyone who's been abused will be instantly familiar with. You're being dramatic. You're lying. That never happened. I never said that. If you had just done this, I wouldn't have had to. These excuses come up in other situations too. Oftentimes, the world will gaslight those who face forms of systemic oppression, demanding we prove that we're oppressed, demanding we prove where the oppression exists, and then ignoring it.
Institutional racism does not actually combat racism. You have to find individual instances, and you have to show me who the racists are so that we can fight them together. I hate racism. I think it's evil. But if you're just going to say institutional racism every time something bad happens, there's no way to fight it. I need a policy that you're proposing, or I need a person who's actually racist so that we can fight it together, or we can determine whether the policy is good. What I find really problematic is the virtue signaling that I see by so many people on the other side, which is, I don't have to give you the racist, I don't have to tell you who he is or what measures I'm proposing. I just say institutional racism, everybody cheers for me because that's an approved point of view, and now we move on with our lives. You haven't helped anybody, you've just made yourself feel better.
If black people don't want to be shot, why don't they comply? But Philando Castile complied. Tamir Rice was never given orders. Breonna Taylor was asleep. And in my own personal experience of police brutality, I was complying. I was following orders. It didn't stop me from being assaulted. It didn't stop me from being shot. It didn't matter. Ben Shapiro demands that we show him where the systemic oppression is. Well, we've been trying. Here it is right here. Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old black woman, was fatally shot by the white Louisville Metro Police Department officers Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankinson, and Miles Cosgrove on March 13, 2020. The officers entered her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, executing a search warrant. They claimed to have knocked before forcing entry, but whether or not they announced themselves or whether or not they announced themselves adequately is disputed. And none of their neighbors, except for one, claimed to have heard them actually announce their presence before beginning their attack. Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, thought they were intruders and fired a warning shot. According to officials, that warning shot hit Mattingly in the leg, though this was found to be untrue by ballistics. The officers fired 32 shots in return. Walker was unhurt, but Taylor was hit by 6 bullets in the hallway inside her apartment and died. None of the cops who murdered Breonna Taylor were charged with her murder, but one of them, just one, was charged with wanton endangerment for the bullets that hit the wall and entered the neighbor's apartment. There's the systemic racism. There's the boogeyman. On the anniversary of Emmett Till's death to the day, the government announced that black women do not and will never matter under the current system. The government decided that a few inches of damaged drywall are more important than the life of a black woman. We point at it and we're ignored, shut down, and gaslit, not just as black people, but as any marginalized group, as trans people, for example. J.K. Rowling has said before that if she saw trans people facing oppression, she would stand with us, which is really funny because 1, you are the oppression. 2, it's a lie because when she's presented with the facts by literally anyone, she blatantly ignores it. She has no interest in hearing the truth about the trans experience at all, and no interest in protecting trans people at all. She cites fears about detransitioners in her stupid little TERF manifesto, but ignores the fact that most detransitioners do so due to oppression that she is continuing.
This is J.K. Rowling, the creator of Harry Potter, of course, who sparked outrage last weekend with a series of controversial tweets about trans women. She's now written an essay on her blog addressing the accusations and saying her opinions stem from her own experience with domestic violence. That's why she's been pushed to advocate for women's rights, she says.
Last weekend. And that's when J.K. Rowling responded on Twitter to a headline she read online that read, "Creating a more equal post-COVID-19 world for people who menstruate. And she responded by saying, I'm sure there is a word for these people, followed by a number of deliberately misspelled versions of the word woman. Now, there was instant backlash to that. She was accused of being transphobic, so she wanted to further clarify herself and sent out another tweet over the weekend. That one said, quote, "I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." Now, again, as you mentioned, an essay. She's trying to explain herself further, a lengthy essay, saying her position in part comes from being a victim of both domestic and sexual abuse. And what she says is, in mentioning these things now is not in an attempt to garner sympathy, but out of solidarity with the huge numbers of women who have histories like mine, who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns about single-sex spaces. Now,
Ben Shapiro will cite worries about trans suicide rates to prove why people shouldn't be allowed to transition, but ignore the fact that simply being accepted lowers trans suicide rates dramatically. Here's where things get a little complicated though, because Rick Riordan, angel that he is white, and there is a school of thought that believes that when it comes to certain realities that people of color face, white people shouldn't portray those stories or realities because it's not their story to tell. It's essentially write what you know. Red from OSP does well to touch on this one in one of her appropriately titled Trope Talks, though she doesn't really offer a solution, not that she has to. But this is one of those things where many white allies don't really feel it's their place to comment or offer a way forward, and it's not. But that's okay, because I think the general feeling among most audiences now is something along the lines of this. White authors can address the struggles and issues that people of color face. The fact is that there weren't really many resources for me to find more black stories that would have actually been appealing for a child like me at the time, that would have helped me to process the feelings I was having. The Kane Chronicles was kind of all that was really available to me. There's a positive role that even bare minimum stories like the Kane Chronicles played in that time before those resources were widely available. But there's a level of care you have to take when portraying the stories of the marginalized. Rick Riordan does not get his representation 100% right sometimes, and that's okay because almost no one does. But if a genuine effort to do something positive is being made, and those who make the mistake are willing to take steps to rectify it and apologize for it, then the issue is pretty much solved right there. At least in my opinion. When people get representation wrong, there's two possible paths. You can do the Noelle Stevenson route, where after coming under fire for a poorly received joke about one of her black characters, she apologized and took steps to rectify the issue. Or you can be like J.K. Rowling, double down on your bigotry, write stories that embody your sick fantasies about hunting and abusing trans people, and continue to suck in general. I don't particularly expect anyone to get the very specific experiences of oppressed peoples correct in a story at 100%, but I do expect effort. And authors like Rick Riordan, showrunners like Rebecca Sugar, and others do put forth a genuine effort to create good representation. But they, mostly Rick, also go the extra mile of not simply telling black people's stories or queer people's stories, but also uplifting the people within those communities already trying to tell those stories. But also uplifting the people within those communities already trying to tell those stories as well. Rick Riordan Presents is an initiative created by Rick Riordan Rick Riordan Presents is an initiative created by Rick Riordan to give more authors of color exposure for their works. A case of a white author actually using his privilege to help people of color and marginalized people in general within his industry, which is something I find very cool. The discourse around J.K. Rowling and her transphobia is incredibly annoying at times because people seem to make it a more difficult question than it is whether or not we can enjoy her works due to bigotry. I mean, you can. No one's going to stop you, but at this point, there's no excuse for you not to know what it is you're enjoying, who it is you're giving money to, who it is, and what it is that your money is going toward. J.K. Rowling was racist at the same time she was transphobic. People get so stuck on her transphobia because for some reason everything about trans people has to be a damn debate, but we should have been moved on from her. You've been empowering a woman who's actively racist and anti-Semitic for years. to the point that pointing those things out about her is basically considered low-hanging fruit. You're empowering someone who's made no effort to meaningfully reconcile with any of her mistakes, including lying to fans about Hermione being black, even though she was blatantly stated to be white. The anti-Semitic caricatures of the goblins in the series, switching one of the only black actresses in the movies with a white one, and a lot of other stuff on top of her transphobia. You already knew the answer. If I could spot the racist bits when I was 12, so could most of y'all. If you're giving money to Rowling, you already know what you're endorsing and you just don't care at this point. There's no need for you to pretend that you're confused by what to do, or that Harry Potter is just so important to you that you just can't stop giving money to someone who's racist. Clearly you've made your bed. You know what you're endorsing. The fact is, better books exist. Better authors exist. Way better books and authors exist. God, Harry Potter is not that good. I'm sorry if that's a controversial hot take, but I've never been able to really enjoy those books. The only time I really enjoyed the movies was whichever one it was where they fought the giant snake, and that's just because I had an obsession with giant snakes and dragons when I was younger. Children of Blood and Bone is better than any Harry Potter media. The Dreadnought trilogy is better than any Harry Potter media. I can include in the description an entire list of stories by BIPOC and queer authors that are way better written and won't give money to creepy, low-key predatory women like J.K. Rowling. And yes, I say predatory. She's all too excited to find any reason to slander trans people and all too obsessed with children's gender identities to be normal. I'm just saying Jolene Cujo Rowling might be a little sus. At the end of the day, I'm just asking that we hold those who create our media to a better standard. The alternative to doing so is either more J.K. Rowlings, people with bigoted and dangerous ideas being allowed to make whatever they want, no matter what communities it negatively affects, or a society where no one bothers to try and make better representation because they don't want to bother trying, or are just afraid to get it wrong. I'm excited for the Kane Chronicles movie because, frankly, it would be nice to have Harry Potter fans get talked over by Riordanverse fans for a few minutes. Sweet, blissful silence. But also because I'm genuinely happy to see that a book that was one of the first that made me feel understood is getting made for a new group of fans as well as old ones. And even though we live in a world now where we already have more access to stories being told by people of color, that story will still be important to me and still make an impact, especially if it's being able to be remade and be improved upon now for the modern day. And it's going to be introduced to a slightly kinder world, and that's something that I can be happy about. Okay, I did a lot of talking in this video. I never even introduced myself like I'm supposed to, and that's a mistake, but whatever, we'll rectify that now. Hi, my name is Persephone, this is my channel, please subscribe and give me money, I'm poor. There we go.